I would like to go to my next guest. You all know him, you all love him. The man, KJ No. KJ No is there we are, is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. He was contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. KJ, my man, how you doing this morning? You doing okay?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
It is good to see you too. Give me your take on Donald Trump has started a pissing match all across the globe with tariffs. China is one of those places that is in its crosshairs of, I guess, doing a tariff or sanction war. What has been the Chinese response to Donald Trump and this kind of sanction war that he's leveled against China?
Well, it's been very measured, if you notice. The Chinese have ostensibly done some tit for tat tariffs, but they've been pretty targeted and they don't have a great effect on the United States. So I think they're standing back and they're moving slowly. There's a lot of things that they could escalate with, as we mentioned before. They could withhold strategic metals. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they've started to do that with tungsten now. And so there's a kind of slow inching forward, small movement, small, probes to see how the U.S. will respond. But I think they've been just kind of, waiting to see what happens. It's still early days. They're not happy about Trump's administration removing some of the language on the State Department fact sheet about Taiwan, namely that they do not support independence. That language was removed. So the Chinese have voiced strong opposition to that because they're concerned about the salami slicing that has constantly been happening regarding Taiwan Island. But I think there's just still kind of in this wait and see mode. I think a lot of people are.
Trump pointed out that he wanted not just to deal with Russia. I mean, obviously the relationship or the conversation that's taken place on the issue of Ukraine, it goes beyond Ukraine into this kind of geopolitical or reorganization of the world. He said, at the very least, he pointed out that he wanted trilateral talks to not just include Russia, but also to include China in those talks. What has China's response been to him saying that?
Well, again, China had offered to be the venue for the talks between Russia, U.S., regarding the Ukraine war. So, Beijing was offered as the venue. So clearly, they want to facilitate the process. If you remember very, very early in the game, China was one of the first countries to come forward with a plan for peace, a really kind of stepwise plan for peace. And the thing also to remember is China has good relations with both Ukraine and Russia. So it could actually have a strong role as a mediator. That was not taken up. Instead, they're meeting in Saudi Arabia. But certainly, I think that China does want to be part of the equation or the negotiation. They want to facilitate peace. They are in favor of countries having good relations, seeking win-win relations with each other. I think the key thing to remember, or the key thing to question, is the U.S. relationship with China and the U.S. desire to stop the fighting in Ukraine a precursor to pivoting into China. Okay. And I think there are several ways to interpret that, but there are clearly people in Trump's cabinet for whom that is the plan. They've explicitly said that, Elbridge Colby, who is likely to be very soon be appointed as Undersecretary of State, is going to push for that. And he's said that explicitly. And so these people are not so much against war in general, so much as they are that they want to focus power on China. So that's something that we have to watch out for carefully. Personally, I don't believe that Trump wants war with China or Russia or any other superpower. He's not necessarily anti-war per se, but he is smart enough to know that you do not get into a war with a superpower. So he's against losing wars. He's against the John McCain stain, and so he doesn't want to go down that route. So I think that's a possibility. But let's just note that he has surrounded himself with China hawks,
Mhm.
and these China hawks could be very influential, and they're not. And their idea of U.S. foreign policy is to pivot out of Russia, see if they can actually pull Russia away from China. It's not going to happen, but they want to see if they can pull Russia away from China, and then to pivot and to concentrate on escalating against China.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask that. Is that something China is concerned about? That it's kind of like I always get his name wrong. Pezeshkian in Iran. That seems to be over interested in making a deal with the West in regards to relieving sanctions and those type of things. Is China concerned that the movements that the U.S. is making with Russia, especially in bilateral talks, is in some way going to aggravate, intercede on whatever relationship Russia has with China?
No, I don't think so. The China-Russia relationship is very, very solid. It wasn't built overnight. I mean, it was built over several decades. They've repaired a lot of the bad blood that happened from the 1960s and 70s. Essentially, the Sino-Soviet split is no more. They're very, very close. They're integrated. They say that, they have a relationship that is stronger than yes, exactly, stronger than allies. And so it's not going to happen. And on the other hand, you have the Russian foreign policy uh, elites who understand the nature of the beast that they're dealing with when they negotiate with the United States. As Sergei Lavrov said, the US is not agreement capable. And anything that they have with Trump could be overturned in 4 years or in 2 years, depending on, depending on how legislative elections go. So they're
Yeah.
not going to put all their chips into, that, lay that bet on that number. They're going to stay close with China. China is a neighbor. There are thousands of miles of border with China. They are literally back to back, and they're supporting each other in a very, very concrete and tangible way. They're not going to give that up for a pottage of promises from the United States, which may never materialize, or if they do, may not last very long.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like the speed at which Donald Trump is moving to end the war in Ukraine, ironically, shows this kind of 180 that can take place in regards to policy. And so in this case, it's good. In 4 years, Trump could lose to some rando Democrat that upsets all of it and just changes all of it. So 1,000% agree with you on this. It is fascinating, though, the speed at which Trump is moving on this. Effectively looking like he's trying to get the deal. And like you point out, I don't think he wants a war. But if he doesn't want a war, why is the Taiwan card now being played again? I mean, is it just in order to get some kind of political benefit out of playing Taiwan against China? Like what, meaning Taiwan is a red line every bit as much as Ukraine was a red line. And if he indeed is like, this war's stupid, we should have started this war with Russia, we need to acknowledge Russia's concerns, et cetera, et cetera. The same thing should be true for China, or at the very least, there should be some recognition in his mind that the same thing is true for China. Taiwan is a red line. If you go this route, we will have war. And so if he is not looking for a war with China, then the catch becomes, okay, then why are you playing the Taiwan card? I'm going to ask you, what's the point of playing the Taiwan card?
So, so there's the question mark. It's really the question, if you will. I would say that the U.S. deep state, the institutional foreign policy blob, has a strong orientation towards continued escalation to war with China. And this is not something that happened overnight. It has been building for decades, since the 1990s at least, and certainly since 2008, when up to between the 1990s and 2008, there was a group of Americans who believed that by engaging with China, you could bring it down. It was essentially a soft coup attempt, that you would either bring it down, that it would collapse from its own internal contradictions. This was the Hillary Clinton line. It was a collapsist doctrine. Or you could actually absorb China as a kind of junior subaltern partner into the US empire, that it would be a tenant farmer on the US plantation. It would be like a massive Haiti, but that's all it would be. And China broke all those expectations. It developed on its own terms. It did not become this, little tenant farmer like the United States expected. Instead, it grew to become a superpower, an economic superpower of its own right and under its own terms, using its own economic system. And in 2008, remember, the global financial system collapsed completely. And instead of China collapsing, it was very clear that the Western imperial core was actually in danger of collapsing. And they actually had to go hat in hand to China and ask for a bailout. I mean, this was incredible. And of course, no good deed goes unpunished. And so that's when the US began to plan actively for war against China. A doctrine of war was created for China called air-sea battle. That's when all of that started. And then 3 years later, they declared the pivot. And then they started planning the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a plan to isolate China. And so you can see all of these things firing on all cylinders and moving the country, moving the West towards war with China. I believe that that momentum is still ongoing. And of course, you can look at, this is what Garland and I discussed, but if you look at the windows of the House of State, it looks like there's some bickering going on through the windows. Like they're not quite clear which way they're moving. But the fact is the entire House has been placed on a flatbed truck, which is moving in one direction, which is moving towards escalation to war with China. And I believe Taiwan is one of the key places where that trigger will be pulled. All you have to do is read the work of Elbridge Colby, once again, who will be soon appointed as Undersecretary of Defense. And he has, he's mapped it out in this 20-point syllogism. Essentially, we have to take down China. He says, he calls it deter China. But it's like the Department of Defense. The U.S. has not fought defensive wars since, who can remember when, right? It's the same thing. When they talk about deterring China, they're talking about aggressing China.
Well, wait, which one is it that Trump doesn't want war? Oh, okay. So correct. Okay. You got to explain it. Yeah.
Let me clarify. I personally believe that Trump does not want war. Trump is not he does not want war with China. I don't think that Trump is anti-war per se, but he is against losing wars. And I believe that he's smart enough to know that a war against China would be an immediate losing proposition. So he's going the way of trade tariffs, which are essentially a form of economic warfare. If he continues down that road, China is not too concerned about that, because actually China and the US do not do a lot of trade. The effect of China, of the US on China's economy is not that great. It's, the trade surplus is what, hundreds of billions, maybe $500 billion. That amount of money is the GDP of, a Chinese city, right? Shenzhen, Guangzhou. I mean, these cities by themselves have that much GDP onto themselves. So the U.S. Trade with China is equivalent to the Chinese economy of a city. So it's not a make or break situation. So I believe that Trump will continue to engage in tariff wars, and he will use that as leverage against China to get whatever benefit he can seek. At the same time, I believe that he has surrounded himself with institutional neocons who are raring for war with China. And so that's where the internal conflict or the difficulty in deciphering what's going on, most notably, Elbridge Colby comes out of the Center for the New American Security. CNAS is the think tank that has obsessively planned war more than any other think tank, including CSIS. Of course, CSIS is part of it, so is the CFR. But CNAS, more than any other think tank, has planned obsessively for war with China. That is their great white whale. That's why you have Eli Ratner from CNAS. He was the former director. You have Elbridge Colby. He's from CNAS. You had 17 top cabinet officials in the Biden administration. Jake Sullivan.
Wow.
All of them, 17 of them, were out of CNAS, and they were obsessively planning for war with China. Newland is from CNAS, and
Mhm.
that CNAS cabal has not been removed. If Elbridge Colby comes back in, CNAS will be still, in the, catbird seat as far as driving the war against China is concerned. So the question is, what is Trump doing? Why has he surrounded himself with China hawks? Does he want to go along with that? Because if he does, then it will coast straight on towards war with China. There'll be continual escalation. Or does he have another agenda? That part is unclear. And because it's only been a few weeks, we have to watch a little bit further to see what happens.
I get the sense, for one, I think you're right. I don't think all things being equal, he wants war. I think he's trying to get some kind of benefit, trying to, I don't know, keep the horse in the barn in some way. And it seems that he's going with this premise that, well, we may have multipolar world, but America needs to be ahead of that multipolar world. And so the action that he's taken is in order to, in his mind, preserve American hegemony against what he rightly acknowledges is this kind of new, developing, powerful China. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on that. That's what it seems like it's taking place. We need to somehow mitigate the reach and the influence of China in world affairs. And if we need to do that through sanctions, fair enough. I don't want a war because we'd lose it. But maybe we can use the economic might in order to maintain this hegemonic control of global affairs. That's what it seems like. It seems like what he is trying to do is manage the world where America stays in power, but is not necessarily completely and entirely involved in foreign entanglements. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, though. Do you see it that way?
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I think that is probably likely how Trump sees things. But once again, who is he using for this? And I have to emphasize he's surrounded himself with anti-China hawks. And so whether he will be able to bend them to his will, or whether they will, run the show with or without him, remains to be seen. I will say one more piece. Trump is a neo-mercantilist. This is a 19th century view, economic view. You build strong tariffs. You watch the balance of payments. You promote domestic industry. You try and have a favorable or dominant trade relations with other countries. This is how you create wealth in your country. It's actually kind of a misunderstanding of the modern economic world, because at the same time that Trump is a neo-mercantilist, he also wants to maintain the US dollar as the global reserve currency. And he's not wrong in that, because the US dollar is the global reserve currency, the US gets an unlimited credit card. It can print as much money, or, if you will, securities as it wants to. It can get stuff from other countries, $500 billion worth of stuff from China. And the only thing it gives them is pieces of paper, essentially IOUs, US treasuries. Right. So that is very, very advantageous. But that mindset actually is in contradiction to the neo-mercantilist mindset, which is a very, very different worldview and comes from a different different economic model. Essentially, if you want to remain the global reserve currency, there's something called the Triffin dilemma, which means that you actually have to run a current account deficit, that
Right.
you have to be printing more money than you are actually trading with other countries, because that's how other countries also trade. They trade using your money, so you
Right.
actually have to print more, and you have to have a current account deficit. Trump doesn't want that. He wants it both ways. So there's a contradiction in his economic plan, which I'm not sure how he's going to square that circle. It's very difficult. The other thing which I think is clear is that Trump, I think, is relying on leveraging technological superiority. So his notion of war against China, not those of his neocon warmongers, but I think his notion of hegemony involves economic hegemony, remains to be seen, and also technological hegemony. And so, in particular, in the domain of artificial intelligence, people have said AI is the one technology that will rule them all. Alex Karp has said that AI is a winner-take-all race. Whoever wins the AI race wins everything. And I think that's not an exaggeration. It is the cusp of transformation of a new industrial or technological revolution. So who takes the prize in AI takes everything. And Trump is focused on doing that. That's why he's surrounded by the Silicon Valley, tech class. That's why they, just put, 500 billion into, this new AI project. And that has all of a sudden rapidly been undermined by DeepSeek AI, the Chinese AI company, which has shown that you can do the same thing that these, bloated tech companies are doing, like OpenAI, for a tiny fraction of the cost. And they have put that out into the public domain as open source. And so once again, they're beating the US hands down in that domain. And part of it has to do with the problem that US, both industrial, strategic, and technological policy is largely led by lawyers. These are lawyers making these decisions. The US leadership is a leadership made of lawyers and sometimes failed businessmen. But in China, the leadership, they are all scientists and engineers and mathematicians. And so if you have lawyers going up against mathematicians in what is essentially a math war, AI is a math war because AI is just math. It's just applied math. So if you have a lawyer going up against a mathematician in a math war, who do you think is going to win? The mathematicians are going to come out ahead. It's even unclear, whether these lawyers even understand the technology or the math behind it. This is why sanctions failed completely. They just didn't understand what they were getting into. They were just thinking it from a kind of legalistic standpoint. We put these kind of holds, we put in these laws, and that's what's going to happen. They don't understand that technology develops, that algorithms can be improved, that DeepSeek, was using mixture of experts, 8-bit numbers, reinforcement learning, etc. And all of a sudden they're ahead and they're doing the same thing. What, took OpenAI $100 billion or $500 billion, they're doing it for millions.
Last question before I let you go. What do you think Trump wants from Xi Jinping? If they come to, let's say they have their own meeting, they have their own summit, what is it that you think Trump is trying to get out of that meeting in order to come to some kind of agreement in regards to the world order and the way that in the manner to which he is operating? Meaning, in the same way that he wants to have this kind of bilateral conversation with Vladimir Putin that's supposed to take place in a few weeks, if the same thing takes place with Xi Jinping, what do you think that meeting is about? And what do you think Trump wants in order to come to some kind of agreement where he shakes hands with Xi Jinping, we got a deal? What do you think that deal is?
I'm on thin ice here because I don't have a lot to go on, but I would, at the risk of psychologizing, I would say that he wants ego gratification. I think he wants validation. He wants them to recognize him as a great leader of a great country, the greatest country in the world, that he's making the greatest country in the world. I think he may, in the best of words, try to come to some kind of modus vivendi with the other great superpowers. So that is, the kind of optimistic viewpoint. But as I said, he has surrounded himself with China hawks who are looking for some kind of escalation to kinetic war. They are in panic because, by their own estimates, if the US does not engage in war with China by 2025 or 2027, that horse is out of the gate. It's too big. The
Yeah.
dragon is too big. It's no longer capable. You can no longer win that war. The US is on a timeline. It is actually more urgent for the US to initiate a war with China. And so if that's the case, in that meeting, if we take the cynical view, I think that there could be a lot of cynical promises, this game of good cop, bad cop that you constantly saw with the Biden administration, which came out, the CNAS strategy of playing Jekyll and Hyde, good cop, bad cop, what they call armed social work. It's a counterinsurgency approach to your enemies where you play good, you play nice, you keep them all, constantly off balance. And underneath, you're constantly inching towards undermining them.
Yeah.
And I think that is the danger that we have to watch out for. I don't think that we can rule that possibility out. And I think that, I think it's an oversimplification to think that now that Trump is in the White House, that deep state agenda, that deep state escalation to war has gone away. Let me just say a few more things. Remember, as Biden was on his way out, there was a attempted military coup in South Korea. I believe that was an attempt to trigger war with North Korea, which would have resulted in the US taking operational control over South Korea's military, which would have then given it a massive force projection platform, which they could have taken, 500,000 troops or up to 3.6 million troops, if you include South Korean reservists, to initiate a war against China and to initiate a war against Russia. Remember, Russia and North Korea have just signed a mutual defense treaty. And
Right.
they've also been taken to Ukraine because South Korean troops are trained for cold weather warfare, attritional warfare, trench warfare, exactly the kind of warfare that would have been useful in fighting in Ukraine. And that's why we had all of these canards about North Koreans fighting in Kursk. Nobody has shown any proof, and now they've suddenly vanished. But I believe that was part of the calculation. So I think that's just an example of the desperation. I believe if South Korea had fallen, and if it had gone to a military dictatorship, you'd have very rapidly seen a military dictatorship in Taiwan as well, because they need a military dictatorship in order to Ukrainize the country, just as Zelensky has a military dictatorship right now. Taiwan, they want to Ukrainize Taiwan. This was set into plan in 2022 with the Taiwan Enhanced Resiliency Act. That was the plan. And remember, Taiwan serves, like Ukraine, as the key platform for war. Every attack on China in the past 600 years has gone through Taiwan Island. And so if Taiwan could have very rapidly become a military dictatorship, they cheered South Korea's military dictatorship. And if South Korea's military dictatorship had been successful, I believe that they would have also tried the same tactics because they say we're suffering the same issues. And I also believe that the Philippines, which is currently fighting a dirty war to wipe out an insurgency, could also very rapidly transition to a military dictatorship. So what you would have had is this axis of fascism, which is traditional from the 1940s to the 1970s, 1980s. There was an axis of fascism, which was Taiwan, South Korea, and Philippines. I think they would have gone back and reverted to that old axis of fascism. And in so doing, they would have been the key US proxies for war against China. I think that piece was undermined when Yoon Suk-yeol failed in his little coup attempt. And so now the chessboard is all jumbled again. So we have to wait a little bit, see how the moves are reforming.
Mhm.
But certainly, I don't believe the neocons have gone away. I don't believe their dreams of war with China have dissipated.
Those people are lunatics. KJ, love you, man. Thank you for this. KJ No is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. He was contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. KJ, where can people find you?
They can find me on the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network. I just recently did a presentation for the International Manifesto Group and Friends of Socialist China discussing AI and war. So they can also find me on that.
Very cool, my man. Thank you for this, KJ. You have a good one. Be safe, okay?
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Always, man. Thank you. All right. I am going to end this because I have an interview with Mirandi at 10:15. I want to go through the chats first. Duly noted, Trump needs to replace Kellogg with Colonel McGregor. McGregor is fantastic. Mr. Riffley, I'm coming to the sincerely held belief that Israel was behind 9/11. I didn't think that a year ago. Talk me down. I can't talk you down. I don't have a tick on that, to be honest. Pretty ugly things. Super sticker. Shout out to you, Pretty Ugly Things. Janice Anderson. Workers Strike Back Convention on Saturday at 10 a.m. Due Dissonance, offer to send links to their for live for other streamers to air on their own platform. Reach out to them, Janice. I will reach out to them on that. Thank you very much. The well-dressed nerd, brave Bernie is being a hoe. So true, yet nothing new. Brave, you are absolutely right. Bernie is being a hoe, a sheepdog, a bell cow, as the way he was called by Professor, or for that matter, Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm going to end this because I don't want to be late. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. You can support this content through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Super Stickers, memberships, all of those things. You pay for this content. Most of these shows are demonetized, so anything that you offer to the show is deeply appreciated and helps this content keep ticking along. I'm going to say like it, share it, subscribe to it. You guys have a fantastic day. Hopefully this interview goes well. The last one ran technical issues, so I want to try to get that stuff straight now. So I'm going to say you guys have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 98. Signing off.